Peach Boy Riverside is honestly wasted potential. One of the shows I was really interested in, due to my love for myths and lores, and sad to say but I was really let down by it. An already set up premise ruined by a horrible method of storytelling. The show's later episodes honestly made me want to drop it, due to how mind-numbingly annoying the arrangement is and how shit barely makes sense. Story, 2/10. Honestly there's nothing much to say about the story. It's set in your usual fantasy world with humans and demons and big titty anime girls. It's filled with cliches and oftentimes have no idea where they want the story to go towards. The first few episodes will definitely get you interested, but the problem starts in the later half. The storytelling in this show is horrible. The episodes being scattered is honestly annoying and RLY takes you off the world, worse if you are watching weekly. The story introduces various major events and backstories out of the blue, then proceeds to not explain the outcome or the effects of thy said events. Like Brew, the last thing I want to do is brainstorm the events of 9 episodes and put them in order before watching the latest one. Characters, 5/10. Probably one of the redeeming aspects of the show. The characters aren't the most unique or mind-blowing, but they blend into the world well and honestly makes you curious to see their journey through. The most interesting character is definitely Mikato. A feminine-looking male, whom everyone confuses for a girl, which is a running gag on the show. His backstory is simple yet interesting. It's honestly amusing to see him go from being all quiet and collected, to losing his shit and getting horny over the thought of killing ogres. Sally is another character that catches your eye for 2 reasons, her powers, and slightly less yet fiery thirst for killing ogres, similar to Mikato's, and of course, those big fat bosoms, praise the Lord. The 2 main characters have contradicting aims, one seeking peace between the ogres and humans, and the other seeking total annihilation of their species, and it really is fun to see how this plays out. The side characters are just there for the sake of being there, doesn't really catch your attention or get you heavily invested in them. Frow's a walking, talking rabbit who turns into Batman for a short while, oh yeah apparently he's also dead-id. Carrot's swaying between her ogre origins and human affections is executed pretty poorly. The night guy is there, yet. Millia's hyperactive nature and her interactions with ogre-hating Mikato is fun to see. But that's honestly it for side characters. Art, 6/10. With the sheer abundance of ice guys plaguing my eyes with the same, generic art, it's almost refreshing to see a somewhat new and unique art style. Now it's definitely no Monogatari or Violet Evergarden, but it's enough to deserve a pat in the back. The animation is, alright I guess. The fair few fights there is has subpar animation, and most fights end before you can even realize what happened, or maybe I fell asleep id. The backgrounds and surrounding gives you an olden age fantasy world vibes. The art fails in the demons aspects though. Although the main demons have some uniqueness to them, the lesser ones look super generic, and oftentimes comical. It fails to convince you that these are an actual threat and feels more like a villain out of Power Rangers. Kinda takes you away from the world, but thankfully Sally's titties are there to hook you right back in. Sound, 5/10. I don't really pay attention to sound, but the OSTs in this show are decent. It definitely helps to make you feel the olden fantasy vibes a lot more. The ops and EDS alright, nothing spectacular. Overall, 4/10. Definitely not the worst thing to ever come out since Corona, but not good enough to leave you satisfied or looking back on it fondly. The episodes were fun in its own means sure, but I felt more annoyed than pleasant after completing every episode, remembering that the previous episode and the next one has no CO relation to the one I just watched. I regret watching it weekly. I feel like I would have appreciated the show more by binging it in the proper order. It had a lot of potential to be a fairly decent fantasy show in the pile of repetitive garbage that we get nowadays. Not a show that makes me want to overdose on heroin, but definitely not one I'm going to think of when I want to watch a fantasy show in the future. Peach Boy Riverside speaks as much about racism as much as a 10-second video of a dancing T-Rex with "racism is bad" in huge text in the background. But while Clickhole was satirizing the surface-level nature of media championing anti-racism stances without meaningfully contributing to the cause, PBR thinks it's making a grand statement on race in spite of its superficiality and comes across as shallow at best and runs outright contrary to its message at its worst. At its core, PBR is a mediocre, and I mean mediocre, action shounen where the fight scenes are poorly paced, and as competent the animation is, nothing interesting. It values the characters endlessly talking and giving one-liners over proper choreography or even striking visuals. I hate making direct comparisons, but it's inevitable since it's airing just a day apart, but you know your action anime is in trouble when a cutesy slice of life comedy has far better action scenes than you. I don't know who to pin the blame on, whether it's the original source material, the original web manga, or the animators for their incompetency, but the end result is still a boring mess to behold. Speaking of its themes, the writing is just so weak. Coming directly after Cool's own Maid Dragon S, where, while simple, can deliver moments of wit and cleverness in its writing, the writing of PBR is just asinine. To support its themes of racism is bad, they show that both the main characters and the main villains, and everyone in between, are unkind assholes at best, and unhinged psychopaths at worst. Apart from Sally and Frau and Hawthorne all taking neutral but not really stances, there is nothing that's explored on race, class, and treatment of different people. The only thing I got out of this was that the people being discriminated, the ONI, are cruel assholes too. At least with Maid Dragon, Cool wisely decided to keep the anti-racism themes in the back burner if he can't meaningfully expand upon it, and the few times Maid Dragon deals with racism it's usually dealt in a more mature manner than PBR's Everyone is Bad angle. Beyond its failings to convey its themes, PBR is just dull. The story is as milquetoast as these action shounen get, with Sally or Mikoto going to different towns, meeting racist assholes and begrudgingly protecting them from racist ONI. In Mikoto's case it's because he's genuinely unhinged, but even that isn't conveyed well or is played interestingly. But the problem isn't because the plot is generic, plenty of shows have a similar structure, it's because none of the characters are likable at all. PBR does the thing where it kills off characters and expects you to have an emotional response to it, and this happens to characters you barely even get to know. Worse still, the core cast of characters are generally boring to follow since the main story never bothers to meaningfully develop them in any way. Yameki goes through some things, but none of that either meaningfully changes the plot or her dynamics with the group she's in. If anything, the show isn't particularly funny, nor does it evoke any emotional response from me. It's just boring, and that's a greater misstep than anything else. I can appreciate weirdo wild rides where it utterly fails to convey its themes like Guilty Crown, but I just can't sit through a boring slog like this that also fails to convey its message. The director of the show also took the baffling idea to jumble up the sequence in a misguided attempt to salvage this mess with the excuse that it's done for pacing purposes, being a big fat lie since if anything it completely destroys the pacing. Not that shows that air out of order can't work, see the broadcast order of Haruhi as an example, but you gotta make sure that the show was made to be watched out of order in the first place. As such, scenes that should generate tension completely fall flat on its face, such as the final few episodes, or how the actual chronological final episode made the show feel like it ended abruptly and has the consequence of making episodes after that feel like even more of a slog to go through. It's just baffling to see such a deliberate act of sabotage that it must be some kind of joke, especially since some streaming services just air the show in chronological order. I suppose the only reason I kept on watching this is for the slim chance that there's a cameo by Toru or Elma. Spoilers, there isn't. But that's quite possibly the worst reason to continue a show. At the end of each episode, I have to rewatch Maid Dragon S in order to convince myself that Cool isn't a complete hack and that he can write genuinely good material. But alas, that isn't the case with PBR. If you want an action show that's funny, deals with themes of the relations of race in a more nuanced manner, and has amazing action sequences, just watch Maid Dragon. 3/10.